So welcome to another Wargame review by theplayers8.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we are taking a look at the Battle of Stalingrad. And this is by Turning Point Simulations. And this game is designed by, and I'm going to butcher this, Hjalmar Gerber. This came out in 2012, and interestingly enough, this game is very, very much not about the Battle of Stalingrad.
Right.
But it's actually the Battle of
the approach to Stalingrad.
Yeah, it's southeast Russia, and it's the land surrounding Stalingrad, and Stalingrad's kind of a focus point, but the city is just one hex, and it's all of the land surrounding that.
Which is not what I thought it was going to be.
No, yeah, I was.
When we got this game a couple months ago, and I thought, Battle of Stalingrad.
Oh yeah, I was expecting to have dudes on a map running through
In a
buildings
city,
and streets.
Yeah.
That's definitely not what this is. This is like army and division level game.
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff here for such a small game. This is part of the what's it called?
20 decisive battles of the world.
Yes, and Stalingrad's one of them. Obviously, know that was a big turning point in World War II, and this game did a decent job of reflecting what that would or could look like. So, what are some things about the game that you thought were very interesting or that you liked?
Well, I think your comment is exactly right. I think they did a lot of things very well in this game. I think we've played several East Front games, and I think every single one of them is Russians die, fall back, Germans run them over, and then they stiffen at the end and kind of try to make a comeback. This game did that. We talk a little bit about that, and maybe we should leave that for the negative side. But I think this game actually covers this battle very well. It is in my opinion, a very pure simulation. It is looking at trying to recreate that battle itself. But a couple of things I really liked, and we may show the board just very briefly, but I really liked this Trans-Caucasus front boxes, figuring out how to get troops back and forth to protect those victory points. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, they abstracted out a lot of the
right, because Russia, stuff. A couple thousand miles was the front, right? 1,500 miles, and they only really focused on, I don't remember what the scale was, but my guess is that's 400 or 500 miles.
Yeah, I think each hex is like 33 miles or something like that.
So this is 300-400 miles, and then this covers the rest of the 500 or 600 mile front. So I really liked that. I thought that was very, very different. I actually really liked the scoring mechanics and what the Germans were trying to do. Get to Stalingrad, hold Stalingrad, or, in the end, have a unit in supply adjacent to the Volga River. Very interesting. I don't know that we've played the other Eastern Front games we've played. That's not been the victory conditions.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of cool. Also really liked the units and the hidden information regarding those units. We had the ability through, what were they called, build points or replacement points, RPs, to in essence increase the power of each of our units. So we got to choose within certain restraints. They had to be alive, they had to be in your army, but you could build them up, and then you could add these really cool, what were these called? Assets. These really cool asset tokens, which represented tanks and artillery,
extra infantry,
special infantry units, and then anti-tank weapons. Really cool. I liked that element. As they died and got killed, you had to kind of resurrect them and bring them back.
And those were usually much more expensive than the actual units themselves.
And that may be what had got me in the end. I think I spent a lot of time. You can see I have a lot of those left, and I spent a lot of points getting those back because I felt like they were so good. But I really liked that. And I liked, we had a screen here. So Alexander was the Germans, and I couldn't see anything about his units. He couldn't see anything about mine, so that was kind of cool. I liked that.
I thought the fog of war aspect, and for this game, you'll need like some kind of a divider, like a Dungeon Master screen. We had like a
TV,
like a monitor between us. But I like how the factions are. The units are very, very different. So the Russians had tank units, which the tank unit has an inherent power value. but it has 4 or 5 slots for these extra assets, which just add more and more power to them. Whereas the German units, some of their panzer divisions had 1 or 2 slots, but a lot of their infantry armies only had the slots for 1 of them.
Right.
So where the Russians would get killed really early on because the Germans had those assets to begin with, eventually the Russians were able to get units with stacks and stacks and stacks of power to kind of hopefully counterattack later in the game.
Which I think I did a decent job of that.
Yes.
To be honest, a couple of rolls at the end of the game, I think I rolled a couple of 1s and 2s, where I might have been able to force you to retreat. It would have potentially been a different outcome. So I think that was good, that it came down to that it wasn't a runaway victory for you, but it actually had an opportunity to go the other way at the end. And I think that's a hallmark of a well-designed game.
Yeah, it's a two-edged sword, though, right? Because you either have a game that is either extremely balanced and comes down to the last action, or you can kind of take it the other way and say, the game was decided on a die roll.
Well, and that's yeah.
It
harkens back to the Invincible Armada.
Yeah.
Remember that game that we played from this same company? We felt like there was a lot of really cool tactical and strategic maneuvering, and then it came down to a couple of die rolls at the end where my fleet just got obliterated.
But even playing Combat Commander or something like that, you play a 3-hour game and it comes down to like 1 card.
It always does. It always does.
And it's a good balanced game, but I think
Yeah.
there's a level of dissatisfaction of like,
Right.
That's.
I either won or lost.
But I don't think there's a way to get around that.
Yeah.
Unless you're playing a purely odds-based combat thing with tables, and that's fine. Those are good too. But
yeah,
this one was just a few poor rolls for you, and I was able to eke out a win.
I did really like at the end of the game. I felt like I was searching for opportunities with my units to not kill your units, but simply to get them out of supply.
Yeah.
Over here, kind of on the northwest side of Stalingrad, we had 4 or 5 units, and I was kind of maneuvering, trying to get him out of supply because he had units that were right next to the Volga, and he would have won automatically because of that. That was kind of fun. I liked that puzzle, and it really caused me to think. A lot of times we don't think about supply. That is something I think in war games, while it's important, it generally is not used as a weapon. It is actually, but this seemed to be like it came down to that, and I kind of like that. I like that.
That mattered the most right at the end.
At the end, yeah. It wasn't about combat. It wasn't about power. It was about how can I position myself to cut off supply lines, move him out of position, and I like that.
And that would then signal the turning of the tide on the Eastern Front.
Right.
The 6th Army gets completely
They're cut off, and we're going to destroy them.
And then they push back through west.
But I did like that.
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll take a real brief look at the board and some of the player aids and just kind of show you like how the game plays and what it's like. So here's the map, and this is kind of the final standings of the game. And like you'd kind of expect, there's a big cluster of units here. Stalingrad's right here. And I was trying my hardest as the Axis forces to just get units onto the Volga and just get enough there that it would be impossible for him to eliminate or cut off every single one of them. And there was a time I held Stalingrad for a couple of turns, but he was able to take me out of there pretty simply. This box and this strip of boxes down here is what we were talking about, where you have the Transcaucasus front. And so this represents, abstractly lots of different areas, and there are limits to how many units can be here. So you can have 2 Soviet units and 2 Axis units in this box, and if the Axis control it, they gain 1 VP every turn they control it. And so you have this, you have this little back and forth battle going on, as well as doing kind
it's
of
almost a game
board.
A game inside of the game.
Yeah, but and it gives you, like, I had to divert forces down here to kind of get some VPs.
And that was kind of my plan.
Yeah.
Because I'll just show you really quickly, for instance, and these were not the units that, but I would put units in this Transcaucasus box, and they would then, turn by turn, move forward. And what I did is I moved 3 or 4 units, and they came up in Rostov. Had I not done that, I think you would have swept kind of to the southwest. what I would have probably done had I had it over again, I would have left 1 or 2 units in this box rather than, because I only had one, I think, right? So I would have left maybe 2 in there. Actually, it would have been 2 here, so that I would have slowed you down, because this probably gained you 10 points, maybe 12.
I think I had...
which wasn't a game breaker, but...
I think I had a good amount. I had a good amount from there because these accumulate
every turn.
So I think I had a good
so maybe I would have done that a little bit differently, but I did like that element. I thought that was a nice way of handling, and that's just the thing with these big war games. You've got to figure out a way to abstract something, or these games turn into monsters.
Yeah.
For instance, Fields of Despair by GMT, there's a lot of those little elements that were abstracted, and I really like those abstracted elements. So this did a good job of that Trans-Caucasus front. I liked those boxes.
This is one I enjoyed because the gameplay is really simple.
Fairly simple, yes.
You have move, you have attacks, you're spending replacement points to kind of strengthen your units again. The terrain, the map can seem kind of bland, but really... I enjoyed that because it's your tank units and you're just rolling across the Russian plains. What fascinated me is that for an Eastern Front game, no weather in it.
Right, there was and really no terrain.
No.
There was no added movement penalties or bonuses for different types of terrain. That's fairly uncommon.
Like, we'll take a look at this counter here. So this is... So we have a German Panzer unit here, and we'll take a look at an infantry unit as well. They have these 3 values on them. Every single one of those values is for movement. Not a single one is a combat value, which was... I had to...
Hard to adjust to.
Reading the rulebook, I'm like, oh, surely one of these is a defense value,
right.
An attack value. So, for tactical movement, an infantry unit can move 1 hex, which basically, anytime you have to cross a river, or anytime you enter or exit a zone of control, you have to use tactical movement. So whilst this 2 might be really nice for strategic movement, really that can only be used in open spaces.
Not around other units.
Yeah, and then the Germans have this special middle value that's grey that can be used only in this grey section of the board. So if he comes on here, he can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But as soon as he starts to move out here, he can't use that value. Yeah. So the movement was cool. I mean, you just move across, and the small board, this is a tiny board, keeps it very focused. I enjoyed that. Whereas in a game like, I think, Case Blue, for Unconditional Surrender, I kind of hated the small board.
Right.
Because the terrain and the weather bogged it down so much. I liked that the weather and the terrain were eliminated mostly outside of the rivers because the movement was very fluid, and I enjoyed that. I felt like we were making progress back and forth.
Well, it just became, rather than about the terrain and the weather, it became about using properly strategic movement and your, whatever that was called, infiltration movement, but about using that properly and trying to make sure you were... Because there were a couple times I simply moved 1 space away because I knew you couldn't
I can't then move into battle with because I don't have enough tactical movement.
So I think that was a nice part of the game. It was about moving around, trying to, once again, find that weak spot and then cut off a supply line or even just slow you down.
Yeah, so, but then combat was fascinating because, like we said, this unit doesn't have any combat values. So I'm going to just pull the board back here and we'll the camera back and we'll show you what that kind of looks like. So, Turning Point simulations, I feel like the 3 or 4 games that we've played have a lot of kind of off-map charts and aids and displays. This is no exception, but like we mentioned earlier, these are kind of cordoned off so you can't see each other's displays, so you get excellent fog of war. Now, obviously we've got the Axis here and the Russians and the Soviets over there. So what you have here is, in the 1st Panzer Army, there's 3 on-map units, and those 3 units have a strength value track that you track throughout the game. All the Axis kind of armies start at their highest strength value, usually at 6, and then as they take losses through combat, those losses are just applied as strength value reductions. So then they're less combat effective. The assets that we talked about, these these slightly more faded columns at the end. These are assets, and then you have anti-tank as well. So the assets are, these are little Tiger tanks, and this is a combat value. The 6 is added to their base value on the track here, and the Soviets have these
T-34.
cool T-34s. Let's get that in focus.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they had a bunch of these tanks, kind of cool, as well as some special guards units and shock troops.
Yeah, and so keeping track of I loved the variable combat strength.
Yeah,
and it was all hidden, so you might inflict 4 losses on my stack of 2 units, but you don't know how that looks. And if I split those stacks later, one of those units might be really weak. I might be keeping them as a rear guard, and the other one might be very strong.
I think this really replicated that. Like you said, fog of war, the lack of intelligence and understanding. On that Eastern Front, it was just kind of a mass of humanity coming towards the Russians. They didn't always know exactly what was there. And I think this display system, because it's hidden, really added, I thought, was probably the best element of this game.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it.
I've not played games that have done this type, where you're tracking each individual division's strength. I liked it. I really did like this.
Especially in World War II games.
Right. Very cool.
And what I liked was the asymmetry between the sides. Mm-hmm. The units are very, very different. So these are the Soviet tank units here. They have their strength, and they have so many slots for assets, whereas, the regular infantry units have one. And that was very much the case for a lot of the German units. The Panzer armies had spots for 2, but everything else had just spots for 1.
And one other thing I really liked, one of the anti-tank counters. Sorry, you can see that. So this was something I would attach to a unit, and you can see there it has a 1/2 in the upper right corner. What that told me was that against armor units attacking it, they would only be counted as half strength. So there were several times where I would gleefully scream out, haha, I have anti-tank. And you were like, dang it. Yeah. And that only worked on the defensive.
Yes.
So on the offensive, I had to plan. There were times where I moved that anti-tank around thinking, okay, I'm going to set up this offensive, and then I'm going to set up my defensive position. And that was fun. I really liked those assets.
And I had a Flak 88 cannon unit from the very first turn, and I didn't get to use it till like turn 10.
Twice in the last couple rounds.
Because I kept having it attached to the wrong units. I had it attached to units that were all up here, and he never attacked that stack. And I'm like so frustrated.
Please attack that.
Keep moving it around. Yeah. So that was really, really fun, reallocating and moving those things around. I think the last thing that to do with that asymmetry as well, all the German units start as strong as humanly possible, but the Germans have significantly fewer replacement points, whereas the Russians start with extremely weak units.
Ones,
and they just have cannon fodder to start with. Yeah. But they gain a lot more of the RPs.
Yeah, so here's an example. You can see the turn record track at the top there. Below the first gray column, you can see the RPs. So the Soviets started out with fairly limited 3, 8, but through rounds 3 all the way through round 10, it was 13, 14, 15, 17, 14, all the way up to 26. Now we'll show you the German.
Yeah, the Germans start with 6 and have 6 halfway through the game, and then they just peter out to basically nothing.
So in the game, I kept trying to keep track of, I need to make sure I do more than 6 every turn, because then that meant you were losing ground.
Yes.
And I think that's some rounds I did really well. I do like 10 or 12, and then a couple rounds I did 1 or 2. But that's what the Soviets have to do. They have to whittle down the Germans to make them less and less effective. Yeah. And vice versa, the Soviets have to ramp up so that at the end they have several big units that can really do some counteroffensives.
And then lastly, there's these victory point tracks that the Germans have.
I'm glad I didn't have to keep track of that, by the way.
Honestly,
that was your thing.
Honestly,
wasn't
that bad?
Okay.
No. The calculations at the end were like, okay, read the rule book.
Right.
But the Germans win if they take Stalingrad, Astrakhan, or have a supplied unit on the Volga at the end of the game. If they have that, then you there's a bunch of calculations with the victory points you've accumulated to measure how well you did. And I think I won with 174 points, which is like a material victory. That's like
a medium victory,
the middle tier of victory. But because and I read the rules, and they're like 150 points gets you like the lowest victory setting. And I thought to myself, well, you accrue these so slowly during the game, but
it doesn't seem like you're going to get many. But then at the end, when you started getting down to this Trans-Caucasus track, getting 6-8 points, that started to build that up pretty well.
And then what you have is you have a series of multipliers at the end of the game.
Right.
And that was something, at least as the Axis, I thought was really neat. The variable victory conditions of this game. So what you do is you have a series of these victory point chits, and out of all of the... so you choose kind of like well, I don't have them all here, but you have these primary objectives, and it's Don and Stalingrad, and there's another one, Caucasus.
Right?
Yeah, you just roll a die. Okay, I rolled a 1. That means my primary objective for the game is the Don turn track, the victory point track. The Soviet player doesn't know that, and I put that in a little envelope, and I do the same thing with the secondary victory conditions. I roll another die. Let's say I rolled a 1. So that means my secondary objective is the Stalingrad objective track. I put that in here. And then the tertiary one is whichever track is left. So then, of these 3 tracks, at the end of the game, my primary one, which was Dawn, I believe, this gets tripled.
Multiplied, yeah.
Yeah. And then my Stalingrad one gets doubled because it was the secondary one, and my tertiary one... Or it's some other multiplier like that.
Right.
Where that's going to change every game. So depending on how well you do, if Stalingrad's your primary objective, you have to get there.
Right.
Because then it gets multiplied, and then it gets multiplied again by that chip. So that was a neat little mechanic just to kind of shake things up a bit every time you play this game.
Can you show the combat chart, Alexander? Because this was a part that was a little hard for us to pick up there for a moment. But this is the combat chart, combat results table. It is a game where the attacker's number is then divided by the defender. So if the attacker had, 30 power, and the defender had 10, you're going to divide 30 by 10, and you're going to roll on the 3 table, And then you're going to, when you roll, you're going to base it on your power. So if that defender had 30, he's rolling on this column, whereas the defender who only had 10 is rolling on this column. And you can see, when you get down to these bottom columns, higher rolls are 5, 6, 7, 8 losses with a retreat. Those are big.
And those happen more often than not.
Right. I felt like we were retreating all the time.
Big armies and big stacks
lots
clashing
of losses.
a lot of time.
But this took us a while to figure out, not the mechanics of it, but what... Like any CRT, you got to figure out what makes the most sense and then go after that. So I think I realized as the Russians, I should have been attacking more about middle of the game on, because I was causing good losses. And if I'd have done that a couple more rounds, you may not have had enough to really do much at the end.
And some of the interesting parts of this are, if you look at the 1, so this is, you would roll on this if you had 1-to-1 combat odds. This looks surprisingly similar to the 5-to-1 odds table, and we were the rationale is that these armies are clashing, they're so big, you just have like a ton of targets to shoot at,
and you're going to hit something
so
collateral.
You'll hit something, so the attack is going to take significant losses usually, even though they might overpower them by a very, very strong amount. So there's some very interesting variable combat results that are going to happen there. Yeah. But that's a look at the board, and we'll just wrap up with our final thoughts here. So that was a look at the board. We'll just have some final thoughts on the game. Personally, Eastern Front is probably my least favorite topic of World War II, and I know that's going to be very unpopular. I think a lot of people love Eastern Front games.
Death threats, I think, in the comments.
Not really my favorite. I feel like the game is either very scripted in that Germans make a push, Germans don't make it, Russians push back, or the script is broken and it's the Germans make a big push, the Germans win, and the Russians have done nothing but get pummeled the whole game. From a game standpoint, that's not necessarily very enjoyable to me. However,
Well, I think
this game was I had a good time playing this one.
Yeah, enjoyable for me means I have the ability to do something.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times I end up playing the Russians. We've talked about this. I actually have Russian blood in my body, but we played Case Blue. We played No Retreat, and now we played this is our third. And we've got others that we need to play. But the Russians just get pummeled, and it's just not my thing either. I want to play a game where I have the ability through strategic thinking, proper use of mechanics and limitations to move in and do some damage to someone or take them out of their game. I feel like in a lot of these games, particularly Eastern Front, it's just not the case.
No.
It's a scripted loss for the Russians in many ways.
That being said, I also feel the same way about certain games on the Western Front.
Right.
So I have a game called, it's 1944, The Allied Crusade Across France by Mark Herman. I will never play that game two-player because it's not fun to be the Germans
You
in
just
that
get
game.
pummeled. You just get pummeled.
No one wants to do that. No one wants to sit there and get beat on for 2 hours. That's a solitaire game for me.
Right.
Now, an Eastern Front game, if I was playing it solo, I'd enjoy that more because I don't have to sit there and just get beat on as the Russians. That's just not fun to me.
Well, the Case Blue scenario of unconditional surrender, while it is fairly scripted as well, I felt like that had a little more ability for the Russians to do some things. They had a little better units, a little more mobile units. Actually, I kind of liked this game. But
this was fun.
Too long. I think we talked about this, and that may be our play style. This took us about 4 hours playing wise for 14 turns.
But keep having to reference
the rule book over and over again, and a lot of fiddly calculations. How many times did I calculate my power and you'd say, "Oh, I have anti-tank," and you're like, "Oh my gosh, that just took me 3 minutes to calculate, so I got to do it again." So that's a little fiddly. Playtime a little bit long, but actually a lot of good points. Love these displays. Love the fog of war. Once I figured out the CRT, I enjoyed that. And once again, the game came down to the very ends. I had a chance of winning. Alexander just had a little more better luck at the end there. So I don't know that I want to play this again soon, but I think I might play it again in the future.
Yeah, if I was going to play East Front, I'm going to play No Retreat, or I would play this.
We liked No Retreat much better, I think, than this.
Yeah, well, and
good job, Carl.
I enjoyed this because it was focused. So you just the board's small. I've got my battle line. I'm moving it. It's easier to manage. So that's nice. It's not. And whilst there was a lot of counters on the board, I didn't feel like it was
not too dense.
No, it wasn't too dense. Which some of the other games by Turning Point Simulations I have been that way, where I'm like with my fat hands.
Saratoga was one of those.
I didn't feel that way with this, even though it kind of looks like it should be. I think the off-map stuff was really, really good for that.
Yeah. Fog
of War was excellent. I'd say I enjoyed playing this game. I had a good time. But it's East Front, isn't it?
Right,
it's
yeah. Sorry. We love World War II games. We love. You're playing Unconditional Surrender right now, solo.
And that's what I like is that it has East Front in it.
Right.
But
it's not the sole.
Whilst that's going on, I'm going to do other things as well.
Yeah. And I have the Fall of the Third Reich. We were actually going to play that tonight as well, potentially, before we decided to play this, but. That also has an Eastern Front element, but it's not the whole focus.
Yeah, and that's, but for the price point for this game, you can't beat that.
$35 game, pretty good components, really good map, like the map, love these displays. I think overall this is probably a 7 for me.
Yeah, this is
so 7.5. So I would recommend it if you like East Front war games.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for watching. This has been Battle for Stalingrad by Turning Point Simulations.
Thank you.